Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects by Giorgio Vasari.
Life of Giulio Romano, painter. Among his many, or rather innumerable, disciples, the greater number of whom became able masters, Raffaello da Urbino had not one who imitated him more closely in manner, invention, design, and colouring than did Giulio Romano, nor one who was better grounded, more bold, resolute, prolific, and versatile, or more fanciful and varied than Giulio. Not to mention for the present that he was very pleasant in his conversation, gay, amiable, gracious, and supremely excellent in character. These qualities were the reason that he was so beloved by Raffaello that, if he had been his son, he could not have loved him more. Wherefore it came to pass that Raffaello always made use of him in his most important works, and in particular in executing the papal loggia for Leo X. For after Raffaello had made the designs for the architecture, the decorations, and the scenes, he caused Giulio to paint many of the pictures there, among which are the creation of Adam and Eve, that of the animals, the building of Noah's Ark, his sacrifice, and many other works, which are known by the manner, such as the one in which the daughter of Pharaoh, with her ladies, finds Moses in the little ark, who had been cast adrift on the river by the Hebrews, a work that is marvellous on account of a very well executed landscape. Giulio also assisted Raffaello in painting many things in that apartment of the Borgia tower which contains the burning of the Borgo, more particularly the base, which is painted in the colour of bronze, with the Countess Matilda, King Pepin, Charlemagne, Godfrey de Bouillon, King of Jerusalem, and other benefactors of the church, all excellent figures, and prints of a part of this scene, taken from a drawing by the hand of Giulio, were published not long since. The same Giulio also executed the greater part of the scenes in fresco that are in the loggia of Agostino Chigi, and he worked in oils on a very beautiful picture of Saint Elizabeth, which was painted by Raffaello and sent to King Francis of France, together with another picture of Saint Margaret, painted almost entirely by Giulio after the design of Raffaello, who sent to the same king the portrait of the Vice-Queen of Naples, wherein Raffaello did nothing but the likeness of the head from life, and the rest was finished by Giulio. These works, which were very dear to that king, are still in the king's chapel at Fontainebleau in France. Working in this manner in the service of his master Raffaello, and learning the most difficult secrets of art, which were taught to him by Raffaello himself with extraordinary lovingness. Before a long time had passed, Giulio knew very well how to draw in perspective, take the measurements of buildings, and execute ground plans. And Raffaello, designing and sketching at times inventions after his own fancy, would afterwards have them drawn on a larger scale, with the proper measurements, by Giulio, in order to make use of them in his works of architecture. And Giulio, beginning to delight in that art, gave his attention to it in such a manner that he afterwards practised it and became a most excellent master. At his death, Raffaello left as his heirs Giulio and Giovan Francesco, called Il Fattore, on the condition that they should finish the works begun by him, and they carried the greater part of these to completion with honour. Now Cardinal Giulio de' Medici, who afterwards became Pope Clement VII, took a site under Monte Mario at Rome, in which, besides a beautiful view, there were running waters, with some woods on the banks, and a lovely plain which, running along the Tiber as far as the Ponte Molle, formed on either side a wide expense of meadowland that extended almost to the Porta di San Pietro. And on the highest point of the bank, where there was a level space, he proposed to build a palace with all the best and most beautiful conveniences and adornments that could be desired in the form of apartments, loggie, gardens, fountains, groves, and other things. Of all this he gave the charge to Giulio, who, undertaking it willingly, and setting his hand to the work, brought that palace, which was then called the Vigna de' Medici, and is now known as the Villa Madama, to that condition which will be described below. Accommodating himself, then, to the nature of the site and the wishes of the cardinal, he made the façade in the form of a semicircle, after the manner of a theatre, with a design of niches and windows of the Ionic order, which was so excellent that many believe that Raffaello made the first sketch for it, and that the work was afterwards pursued and carried to completion by Giulio. The same Giulio painted many pictures in the chambers and elsewhere. In particular, in a very beautiful loggia beyond the first entrance vestibule, which is adorned all around with niches large and small, wherein are great numbers of ancient statues, and among these was a Jupiter, a rare work which was afterwards sent by the Farnese family to King Francis of France, with many other beautiful statues. In addition to those niches, the said loggia is all wrought in stucco, and has the walls and ceilings all painted with grotesques by the hand of Giovanni da Udine. At the head of this loggia Giulio painted in fresco an immense Polyphemus with a vast number of children and little satyrs playing about him, for which he gained much praise, even as he did for all the designs and works that he executed for that place, which he adorned with fish ponds, pavements, rustic fountains, groves, and other such-like things, all most beautiful, and carried out with fine order and judgment. It is true that, the death of Leo supervening, for a time this work was carried no further, for when a new pontiff had been elected in Adrian, and Cardinal de' Medici had returned to Florence, it was abandoned, together with all the public works begun by Adrian's predecessor. During this time, Giulio and Giovan Francesco brought to completion many things that had been left unfinished by Raffaello, and they were preparing to carry into execution some of the cartoons that he had made for the pictures of the great hall of the palace, in which he had begun to paint 4 stories from the life of the Emperor Constantine, and had, when he died, covered one wall with the proper mixture for painting in oils. When they saw that Adrian, being a man who took no delight in pictures, sculptures, or in any other good thing, had no wish that the hall should be finished. Driven to despair, therefore, Giulio and Giovan Francesco, and with them Perino del Vaga, Giovanni da Udine, Sebastiano Viniziano, and all the other excellent craftsmen, were almost like to die of hunger during the lifetime of Adrian. But by the will of God, while the court, accustomed to the magnificence of Leo, was all in dismay, and all the best craftsmen, perceiving that no art was prized any longer, were beginning to consider where they might take refuge, Adrian died, and Cardinal Giulio de' Medici was elected Supreme Pontiff under the name of Clement VII, and with him all the arts of design, together with the other arts, were restored to life in one day. Giulio and Giovan Francesco, full of joy, set themselves straightway by order of the Pope to finish the above-mentioned Hall of Constantine, and threw to the ground the preparation that had been laid on one wall for painting in oils. But they left untouched 2 figures that they had painted previously in oils, which serve as adornments to certain popes, and these were a Justice and another similar figure. The distribution of this hall, which is low, had been designed with much judgment by Raffaello, who had placed at the corners, over all the doors, large niches with ornaments in the form of little boys holding various devices of Leo, such as lilies, diamonds, plumes, and other emblems of the house of Medici. In the niches were seated some popes in pontificals, each with a canopy in his niche, and round these popes were some little boys in the form of little angels, holding books and other appropriate things in their hands. And each pope had on either side of him a virtue, chosen according to his merits. Thus the Apostle Peter had religion on one side, and charity, or rather piety, on the other. And so all the others had similar virtues, and the said popes were Damascus I, Alexander I, Leo III, Gregory, Sylvester, and some others. All these figures were so well placed in position and executed by Giulio, who painted all the best parts of this work in fresco, that it is clear that he endured much labour and took great pains with them, as may also be seen from a drawing of Saint Sylvester, which was designed very well by his own hand, and is perhaps a much more graceful work than the painted figure. It may be affirmed, indeed, that Giulio always expressed his conceptions better in drawings than in finished work or in paintings. For in the former may be seen more vivacity, boldness, and feeling, and this may have happened because he made a drawing in an hour, in all the heat and glow of working, whereas on paintings he spent months and even years, so that, growing weary of them, and losing that keen and ardent love that one has at the beginning of a work, it is no marvel that he did not give them that absolute perfection that is to be seen in his drawings. But to return to the stories. Giulio painted on one of the walls Constantine making an address to his soldiers, while in the air, in a splendour of light, appears the sign of the cross, with some little boys, and letters that run thus: In hoc signo vinces. And there is a dwarf at the feet of Constantine, placing a helmet on his head, who is executed with great art. Next, on the largest wall, there is the battle of horsemen which took place at the Ponte Mole, in which Constantine routed Maxentius. This work is worthy of the highest praise, on account of the dead and wounded that may be seen in it, and the various extravagant attitude of the foot soldiers and horsemen who are fighting in groups, all painted with great spirit, not to mention that there are many portraits for life. And if this scene were not too much darkened and loaded with blacks, which Giulio always delighted to use in colouring, it would be altogether perfect. But this takes away much of its grace and beauty. In the same scene he painted the whole landscape of Monte Mario and the river Tiber, in which Maxentius, who is on horseback, proud and terrible, is drowning. In short, Giulio acquitted himself in such a manner in this work, that it has been a great light to all who have painted battle pieces of that kind since his day. He himself learned so much from the ancient columns of Trajan and Antoninus that are in Rome, that he made much use of this knowledge for the costumes of soldiers, armour, ensigns, bastions, palisades, battering rams, and all the other instruments of war that are painted throughout the whole of that hall. And beneath these scenes, right round, he painted many things in the colour of bronze, which are all beautiful and worthy of praise. On another wall he painted Saint Sylvester the Pope baptizing Constantine, representing there the very bath made by Constantine himself, which is at San Giovanni Laterano at the present day. And he made a portrait from life of Pope Clement in the Saint Sylvester who is baptizing, with some assistants in their vestments, and a crowd of people. Among the many attendants of the Pope of whom he painted portraits there, also from life, was the Cavalierino, who was very influential with his Holiness at that time, and Messer Niccolo Vespucci, a Knight of Rhodes. And below this, on the base, he painted a scene with figures in imitation of bronze, of Constantine causing the church of San Pietro to be built at Rome, in allusion to Pope Clement. There he made portraits of the architect Bramante and of Giuliano Lemmi, holding the design of the ground plan of the said church, and this scene is very beautiful. On the fourth wall, above the chimney-piece of that hall, he depicted in perspective the church of San Pietro at Rome, with the Pope's throne exactly as it appears when His Holiness chants the pontifical Mass, the body of cardinals and all the other prelates of the court, the chapel of singers and musicians, and the Pope seated, represented as Saint Sylvester, with Constantine kneeling at his feet and presenting to him a figure of Rome made of gold, in the manner of those that are on the ancient medals, by which Giulio intended to signify the dowry which that Constantine gave to the Roman Church. In this scene Giulio painted many women kneeling there to see that ceremony, who are very beautiful, a beggar asking for alms, a little boy amusing himself by riding on a dog, and the lancers of the Papal Guard, who are making the people give way and stand back, as is the custom. And among many portraits that are in this work may be seen portraits from life of Giulio himself, the painter, of Count Baldassare Castiglione, the author of the Cortigiano, and very much his friend, of Pontano and Marullo, and of many other men of letters and courtiers. Right round the hall and between the windows Giulio painted many devices and poetical compositions, which were pleasing and fanciful, and everything was much to the satisfaction of the Pope, who rewarded him liberally for his labours. While this hall was being painted, Giulio and Giovan Francesco, although they could not meet the demands of their friends even in part, executed an altarpiece with the Assumption of Our Lady, a very beautiful work, which was sent to Perugia and placed in the convent of the nuns of Montelucci. Then, having withdrawn to work by himself, Giulio painted a picture of Our Lady, with a cat that was so natural that it appeared to be truly alive, whence that picture was called the Picture of the Cat. In another picture, of great size, he painted a Christ being scourged at the column, which was placed on the altar of the church of San Prasedia at Rome. And not long after this, Monsignor Giovan Matteo Ghiberti, who was then Datary to Pope Clement, and afterwards became Bishop of Verona, commissioned Giulio, who was his very familiar friend, to make the design for some rooms that were built of brick near the gate of the Papal Palace, looking out upon the Piazza of San Pietro, and serving for the accommodation of the trumpeters who blow their trumpets when the cardinals go to the consistory, with a most commodious flight of steps, which can be ascended on horseback as well as on foot. For the same Monsignor Giovan Matteo, he painted an altarpiece of the stoning of Saint Stephen, which Monsieur Giovan Matteo sent to a benefice of his own, called San Stefano, in Genoa. In this altarpiece, which is most beautiful in invention, grace, and composition, the young Saul may be seen seated on the garments of St. Stephen while the Jews are stoning him. And, in a word, Giulio never painted a more beautiful work than this, so fierce are the attitudes of the persecutors, and so well expressed the patience of Stephen, who appears to be truly seeing Jesus Christ on the right hand of the Father in the heaven, which is painted divinely well. This work, together with the benefice, Monsignor Giovan Matteo gave to the monks of Monte Oliveto, who have turned the place into a monastery. The same Giulio executed at the commission of the German Jacob Fugger, for a chapel that is Santa Maria de Anima at Rome, a most lovely altarpiece in oils, in which are the Madonna, St. Anne, St. Joseph, St. James, St. John as a little boy kneeling, and St. Mark the Evangelist with a lion at his feet, which is lying down with a book, its hair curving in accordance with its position, which was a beautiful consideration, and difficult to execute. Not to mention that the same lion has short wings on his shoulders, with feathers so soft and plumy that it seems almost incredible that the hand of a craftsman could have been able to imitate nature so closely. Besides this, he painted there a building that curves in a circular form after the manner of a theatre, with some statues so beautiful and so well placed that there is nothing better to be seen. Among other figures there is a woman who is spinning and gazing at a hen with some chickens, than which nothing could be more natural. And above Our Lady are some little boys, very graceful and well painted, who are upholding a canopy. And if this picture also had not been so heavily loaded with black, by reason of which it has become very dark, it would certainly have been much better. But this blackness has brought it about that the greater part of the work that is in it is lost or destroyed, and because black, even when fortified with varnish, is the ruin of all that is good, always having in it a certain desiccative quality, whether it be made from charcoal, burnt ivory, smoke black, or burnt paper. Among the many disciples that Giulio had while he was executing these works, such as Bartolomeo da Castiglione, Tommaso Papacello of Cortona, and Benedetto Pagni of Pescia, those of whom he made the most particular use were Giovanni da Lione and Raffaello del Colle of Borgo a San Sepolcro, both of whom assisted with him in the execution of many things in the Hall of Constantine, and in the other works of which we have spoken. Wherefore I do not think it right to refrain from mentioning that these two, who were very dexterous in painting, and followed the manner of Giulio closely in carrying into execution the works that he designed for them, painted in colours after his design, near the old Mint in the Banshee, the escutcheon of Pope Clement VII, each of them doing one half, with two terminal figures, one on either side of that escutcheon. And the same Raffaello, not long after, painted in fresco from a cartoon drawn by Giulio, in a lunette within the door of the palace of Cardinal della Valle, a Madonna who is covering the child, who is sleeping, with a piece of drapery, with St. Andrew the Apostle on one side and St. Nicholas on the other, which was held with justice to be an excellent picture. Giulio, meanwhile, being very intimate with Messer Baldassare Turini da Pescia, built for him on Mount Janiculum, where there are some villas that have a most beautiful view, after making the design and model, a palace so graceful and so well appointed, from its having all the conveniences that could be desired in such a place, that it defies description. Moreover, the apartments were adorned not only with stucco, but also with paintings, for he himself painted there some stories of Numa Pompilius, who was buried on that spot, and in the bathroom of this palace, with the help of his young men, Giulio painted some stories of Venus, Love, Apollo, and Hyacinthus, which are all to be seen in engraving. After having separated himself completely from Giovan Francesco, he executed various architectural works in Rome, such as the design of the house of the Alberini in the Banshee, although some believed that the plan of this work came from Raffaello, and likewise a palace that may be seen at the present day on the Piazza della Dogana in Rome, which, being beautiful in design, has been reproduced in engraving. And for himself, on a corner of the Marcello de' Corbi, where stood his own house, in which he was born, he made a beginning with a beautiful range of windows, which is a small thing, but very graceful. By reason of all these excellent qualities, Giulio, after the death of Raffaello, was celebrated as the best craftsman in Italy, and Count Baldassare Castiglione, who was then in Rome as ambassador from Federigo Gonzaga, Marquis of Mantua, and was much the friend, as has been related, of Giulio, having been commanded by his master the Marquis to send him an architect of whom he might avail himself for the necessities of his palace and of the city, the Marquis adding that he would particularly like to have Giulio, the Count, I say, so wrought upon him with entreaties and promises that Giulio said that he would go, provided that he could do this with the leave of Pope Clement, which leave having been obtained, the Count setting out for Mantua, from which he was then to go on behalf of the Pope to the Emperor, took Giulio with him, and having arrived there, he presented him to the Marquis, who, after welcoming him warmly, caused an honourably appointed house to be given to him, together with a salary, and also a good table for himself, for his disciple Benedetto Pagni, and for another young man who was in his service, and, what is more, the Marquis sent him several cannae of velvet, satin, and other kinds of silken cloth wherewith to clothe himself. Then, hearing that he had no horse to ride, he sent for a favourite horse of his own, called Loggieri, and presented it to him. And when Giulio had mounted upon it, they rode to a spot a bow shot beyond the Porta di San Bastiano, where his Excellency had a place with some stables, called the Te, standing in the middle of a meadow, in which he kept his stud of horses and mares. Arriving there, the Marquis said that he would like, without destroying the old walls, to have some sort of place arranged to which he might resort at times for dinner or supper, as a recreation. Giulio, having heard the will of the Marquis, and having examined the whole place, took a ground plan of that site and set his hand to the work. Availing himself of the old walls, he made in the principal part the first hall that is to be seen at the present day as one enters, with the suite of rooms that are about it. And since the place has no living rock, and no quarries from which to excavate material for hewn and carved stone, such as are used in building by those who can obtain them, he made use of brick and baked stone, which he afterwards worked over with stucco, and with this material he made columns, bases, capitals, cornices, doors, windows, and other things, all with most beautiful proportions. And he executed the decorations of the vaults in a new and fantastic manner, with very handsome compartments, and with richly adorned recesses, which was the reason that the Marquis, after a beginning so humble, then resolved to have the whole of that building reconstructed in the form of a great palace. Thereupon Giulio made a very beautiful model, all of rustic work both without and within the courtyard, which pleased that lord so much that he assigned a good sum of money for the building. And after Giulio had engaged many masters, the work was quickly carried to completion. The form of the palace is as follows. The building is quadrangular, and has in the centre an open courtyard after the manner of a meadow, or rather of a piazza, into which open 4 entrances in the form of a cross. The first of these traverses straightway, or rather passes into a very large loggia, which opens by another into the garden, and 2 others lead into various apartments, and these are all adorned with stucco work and paintings. In the hall to which the first entrance gives access, the vaulting is wrought in various compartments and painted in frescoes, and on the walls are portraits from life of all the favourite and most beautiful horses from the stud of the Marquis, together with the dogs of the same coat or marking as the horses, with their names, which were all designed by Giulio, and painted in fresco on the plaster by the painters Benedetto Pagni and Rinaldo Mantovano, his disciples, and so well, in truth, that they seem to be alive. From this hall one passes into a room which is at one corner of the palace, and has the vaulting most beautifully wrought with compartments in stucco work and varied mouldings, touched in certain places with gold. These mouldings divide the surface into 4 octagons, which enclose a picture in the highest part of the vaulting, in which is Cupid marrying Psyche in the sight of Jove, who is on high, illumined by a dazzling celestial light, and in the presence of all the gods. It would not be possible to find anything executed with more grace or better draughtsmanship than this scene, for Giulio foreshortened the figures so well, with a view to their being seen from below, that some of them, although they are scarcely 1 braccio in length, appear when seen from the ground to be 3 braccia high, and in truth they are wrought with marvellous art and ingenuity, Giulio having succeeded in so contriving them that, besides seeming to be alive, so strong is the relief, they deceive the human eye with a most pleasing illusion. In the octagons are all the earlier stories of Psyche, showing the adversities that came upon her through the wrath of Venus, and all executed with the same beauty and perfection. In other angles are many loves, as likewise in the windows, producing various effects in accordance with the spaces where they are, and the whole of the vaulting is painted in oils by the hands of the above-mentioned Benedetto and Rinaldo. The rest of the stories of Psyche are on the walls below, and these are the largest. In one fresco is Psyche in the bath, and the loves are bathing her, and then wiping her dry with most beautiful gestures. In another part is Mercury preparing the banquet, while Psyche is bathing, with the bacchantes sounding instruments. And there are the Graces adorning the table with flowers in a beautiful manner. There is also Silenus supported by satyrs, with his ass and a goat lying down, which has 2 children sucking at its udder. And in that company is Bacchus, who has 2 tigers at his feet, and stands leaning with one arm on the credence, on one side of which is a camel, and on the other an elephant. This credence, which is barrel-shaped, is adorned with festoons of verdure and flowers, and all covered with vines laden with bunches of grapes and leaves, under which are 3 rows of bizarre vases, basins, and drinking cups, tazze, goblets, and other things of that kind in various forms and fantastic shapes, and so lustrous that they seem to be of real silver and gold, being counterfeited with a simple yellow and other colours, and that so well that they bear witness to the extraordinary genius and art of Giulio, who proved in this part of the work that he was rich, versatile, and abundant in invention and craftsmanship. Not far away may be seen Psyche, who, surrounded by many women who are serving and attiring her, sees Phoebus appearing in the distance among the hills in the chariot of the sun, which is drawn by 4 horses, while Zephyr is lying nude upon some clouds, and is blowing gentle breezes through a horn that he has in his mouth, which makes the air round Psyche balmy and soft. These stories were engraved not many years since after the designs of Battista Franco of Venice, who copied them exactly as they were painted from the great cartoons of Giulio by Benedetto of Pescia and Rinaldo Mantovano, who carried into execution all the stories except the Bacchus, the Silenus, and the 2 children suckled by the goat, although it is true that the work was afterwards retouched almost all over by Giulio, so that it is very much as if it had been all painted by him. This method, which he learned from Raffaello, his instructor, is very useful to young men, who in this way obtain practice and thereby generally become excellent masters. And although some persuade themselves that they are greater than those who keep them at work, such fellows, if their guide fails them before they are at the end, or if they are deprived of the design and directions for the work, learn that through having lost or abandoned that guidance too early, they are wandering like blind men in an infinite sea of errors. But to return to the apartments of the Te. From that room of Psyche one passes into another full of double friezes with figures in low relief, executed in stucco after the designs of Giulio, by Francesco Primaticcio of Bologna, then a young man, and by Giovan Battista Mantovano, in which friezes are all the soldiers that are on Trajan's column at Rome, wrought in a beautiful manner, and on the ceiling, or rather soffit, of an antechamber is painted in oils the scene when Icarus, having been taught by his father Daedalus, seeks to rise too high in his flight, and, after seeing the sign of Cancer and the chariot of the sun, which is drawn by 4 horses in foreshortening, near the sign of Leo, is left without his wings, the wax being consumed by the heat of the sun. And near this the same Icarus may be seen hurtling through the air, and almost falling upon those who gaze at him, his face dark with the shadow of death. This invention was so well conceived and imagined by Giulio, that it seems to be real and true, for in it one sees the fierce heat of the sun burning the wretched youth's wings, the flaming fire gives out smoke, and one almost hears the crackling of the burning plumes, while death may be seen carved in the face of Icarus, and in that of Daedalus the most bitter sorrow and agony. In our book of drawings by various painters is the original design of this very beautiful scene, by the hand of Giulio himself, who executed in the same place the stories of the 12 months of the year, showing all that is done in each of them in the arts most practised by mankind. Paintings which are notable no less for their fantastic and delightful character and their beauty of invention than for the judgment and diligence with which they were executed. After passing the great loggia, which is adorned with stucco work and with many arms and various other bizarre ornaments, one comes to some rooms filled with such a variety of fantasies that the brain reels at the thought of them. For Giulio, who was very fanciful and ingenious, wishing to demonstrate his worth, resolved to make, at an angle of the palace which formed a corner similar to that of the room of Psyche described above, an apartment the masonry of which should be in keeping with the painting, in order to deceive as much as possible all who might see it. He therefore had double foundations of great depth sunk at that corner, which was in a marshy place, and over that angle he constructed a large round room with very thick walls, to the end that the 4 external angles of the masonry might be strong enough to be able to support a double vault, round after the manner of an oven. This done, he caused to be built at the corners right round the room, in the proper places, the doors, windows, and fireplace, all of rustic stones rough-hewn as if by chance, and, as it were, disjointed and awry, insomuch that they appeared to be really hanging over to one side and falling down. Having built this room in such strange fashion, he set himself to paint in it the most fantastic composition that he was able to invent, namely, Jove hurling his thunderbolts against the giants. And so, depicting heaven on the highest part of the vaulting, he placed there the throne of Jove, representing it as seen in foreshortening from below, and from the front, within a round temple, supported by open columns of the Ionic order, with his canopy over the centre of the throne, and with his eagle, and all was poised upon the clouds. Lower down he painted Jove in anger, slaying the proud giants with his thunderbolts, and below him is Juno assisting him, and around them are the winds with strange countenances blowing towards the earth, while the goddess Ops turns with her lions at the terrible noise of the thunder, as also do the other gods and goddesses, and Venus in particular, who is at the side of Mars, and Momus, with his arms outstretched, appears to fear that heaven may be falling headlong down, and yet he stands motionless. The Graces likewise are standing filled with dread, and beside them, in like manner, the Hours. All the deities, in short, are taking to flight with their chariots. The Moon, Saturn, and Janus are going towards the lightest of the clouds, in order to withdraw from that terrible uproar and turmoil. And the same does Neptune, who, with his dolphins, appears to be seeking to support himself on his trident. Pallas, with the 9 Muses, stands wondering what horrible thing this may be, and Pan, embracing a nymph who is trembling with fear, seems to wish to save her from the glowing fires and the lightning flashes with which the heavens are filled. Apollo stands in the chariot of the sun, and some of the Hours seem to be seeking to restrain the course of his horses. Bacchus and Silenus, with satyrs and nymphs, betray the greatest terror, and Vulcan, with his ponderous hammer on one shoulder, gazes towards Hercules, who is speaking of this event with Mercury, beside whom is Pomona all in disarray, as are also Vertumnus and all the other gods dispersed throughout that heaven, in which the effects of fear are so well expressed, both in those who are standing and in those who are flying, that it is not possible, I do not say to see, but even to imagine a more beautiful fantasy in painting than this one, in which the effects of fear are so well expressed, both in those who are standing and in those who are flying, that it is not possible, I do not say, to see, but even imagine a more beautiful fantasy in painting than this one. In the parts below, that is, on the walls that stand upright, underneath the end of the curve of the vaulting, are the giants, some of whom, those below Jove, have upon their backs mountains and immense rocks which they support with their stout shoulders, in order to pile them up and thus ascend to heaven, while their ruin is preparing. For Jove is thundering, and the whole heaven burning with anger against them. And it appears not only that the gods are dismayed by the presumptuous boldness of the giants, upon whom they are hurling mountains, but that the whole world is upside down and, as it were, come to its last day. In this part Giulio painted Briareus in a dark cavern, almost covered with vast fragments of mountains, and the other giants all crushed, and some dead beneath the ruins of the mountains. Besides this, through an opening in the darkness of a grotto, which reveals a distant landscape painted with beautiful judgment, may be seen many giants flying, all smitten by the thunderbolts of Jove, and, as it were, on the point of being overwhelmed at that moment by the fragments of the mountains like the others. In another part Giulio depicted other giants, upon whom are falling temples, columns, and other pieces of buildings, making a vast slaughter and havoc of those proud beings. And in this part, among those falling fragments of buildings, stands the fireplace of the room, which, when there is a fire in it, makes it appear as if the giants are burning. For Pluto is painted there, flying towards the centre with his chariot drawn by lean horses, and accompanied by the furies of hell. And thus Giulio, not departing from the subject of the story with this invention of the fire, made a most beautiful adornment for the fireplace. In this work, moreover, in order to render it the more fearsome and terrible, Giulio represented the giants, huge and fantastic in aspect, falling to the earth, smitten in various ways by the lightnings and thunderbolts, some in the foreground and others in the background, some dead, others wounded, and others again covered by mountains and the ruins of buildings. Wherefore let no one ever think to see any work of the brush more horrible and terrifying, or more natural than this one. And whoever enters that room and sees the windows, doors, and other such like things all awry and, as it were, on the point of falling, and the mountains and buildings hurtling down, cannot but fear that everything will fall upon him, and, above all, as he sees the gods in the heaven rushing, some here, some there, and all in flight. And what is most marvellous in the work is to see that the whole of the painting has neither beginning nor end, but is so well joined and connected together, without any divisions or ornamental partitions, that the things which are near the buildings appear very large, and those in the distance, where the landscapes are, go on receding into infinity. Whence that room, which is not more than 15 braccia in length, has the appearance of open country. Moreover, the pavement being of small round stones set on edge, and the lower part of the upright walls being painted with similar stones, there is no sharp angle to be seen, and that level surface has the effect of a vast expanse, which was executed with much judgment and beautiful art by Giulio, to whom our craftsmen are much indebted for such inventions. In this work the above-mentioned Rinaldo Mantovano became a perfect colourist, for he carried the whole of it into execution after the cartoons of Giulio, as well as the other rooms. And if this painter had not been snatched from the world so young, even as he did honour to Giulio during his lifetime, so he would have done honour to himself after Giulio's death. In addition to this palace, in which Giulio executed many other works worthy to be praised, of which, in order to avoid prolixity, I shall say nothing, he reconstructed with masonry many rooms in the castle where the Duke lives at Mantua, and made 2 very large spiral staircases, with very rich apartments adorned all over with stucco. In one hall he caused the whole of the story of Troy and the Trojan War to be painted, and likewise 12 scenes in oils in an antechamber. Below the heads of the 12 emperors previously painted there by Tiziano Vercelli, which are all held to be excellent. In like manner, at Marmirolo, a place 5 miles distant from Mantua, a most commodious building was erected after the design of Giulio, and under his direction, with large paintings no less beautiful than those of the castle and of the palace of the Te. The same master painted an altarpiece in oils for the chapel of Signora Isabella Buscetta at Santa Andrea at Mantua, of Our Lady in the act of adoring the infant Jesus, who is lying on the ground, with Saint Joseph, the ass and the ox near a manger, and on one side Saint John the Evangelist and Saint Longinus on the other, figures of the size of life. Next, on the walls of the same chapel, he caused Rinaldo to paint 2 very beautiful scenes after his own designs. On one, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, with the thieves, some angels in the air, and on the ground the ministers of the crucifixion and the Marys, with many horses, in which he always delighted, making them beautiful to a marvel, and many soldiers in various attitudes, and, on the other, the scene when the blood of Christ was discovered in the time of the Countess Matilda, which was a most beautiful work. Giulio then painted with his own hand for Duke Federigo a picture of Our Lady washing the little Jesus Christ, who is standing in a basin, while a little St. John is pouring out the water from a vase. Both of these figures, which are of the size of life, are very beautiful, and in the distance are small figures, from the waist upward, of some ladies who are coming to visit the Madonna. This picture was afterwards presented by the Duke to Signora Isabella Buscetta, of which lady Giulio subsequently made a most beautiful portrait in a little picture of the Nativity of Christ, 1 braccio in height, which is now in the possession of Signor Vespasiano Gonzaga, together with another picture presented to him by Duke Federigo, and likewise by the hand of Giulio, in which are a young man and a young woman embracing each other on a bed, in the act of caressing one another, while an old woman peeps at them secretly from behind a door. Figures which are a little less than life-size, and very graceful. In the house of the same person is another very excellent picture of a most beautiful Saint Jerome, also by the hand of Giulio. And in the possession of Count Nicola Maffei is a picture of Alexander the Great, of the size of life, with a victory in his hand, copied from an ancient medal, which is a work of great beauty. After these works, Giulio painted in fresco over a chimney-piece, for Monsignor Girolamo, the organist of the Duomo at Mantua, who was very much his friend, a Vulcan who is working his bellows with one hand and holding with the other, with a pair of tongues, the iron head of an arrow that he is forging, while Venus is tempering in a vase some already made, and placing them in Cupid's quiver. This is one of the most beautiful works that Giulio ever executed, and there is little else in fresco by his hand to be seen. For Saint Domenico, at the commission of Monsignor Lodovico da Fermo, he painted an altarpiece of the dead Christ, whom Joseph and Nicodemus are preparing to lay in the sepulchre, and near them are his mother, the other Marys, and Saint John the Evangelist. And a little picture, in which he also painted a dead Christ, is in the house of the Florentine Tommaso da Empoli at Venice. At the same time, when he was executing these and other pictures, it happened that Signor Giovanni de' Medici, having been wounded by a musket ball, was carried to Mantua, where he died. Whereupon Messer Pietro Aretino, who was the devoted servant of that lord, and very much the friend of Giulio, desired that Giulio should mould a likeness of him with his own hand, as he lay dead, and he, therefore, having taken a cast from the face of the dead man, executed a portrait from it, which remained for many years afterwards in the possession of the same Aretino. For the entry of the Emperor Charles V into Mantua, Giulio, by order of the Duke, made many most beautiful festive preparations in the form of arches, scenery for dramas, and a number of other things, in which inventions Giulio had no equal, nor was there ever any man more fanciful in preparing masquerades and in designing extravagant costumes for jousts, festivals, and tournaments, as was seen at that time with amazement and marvel by the Emperor Charles and by all who were present. Besides this, at different times he gave so many designs for chapels, houses, gardens, and facades throughout the whole of Mantua, and he so delighted to embellish and adorn the city, that, whereas it was formerly buried in mud and at times full of stinking water and almost uninhabitable, he brought it to such a condition that at the present day, thanks to his industry, it is dry, healthy, and altogether pleasing and delightful. While Giulio was in the service of that Duke, one year the Po, bursting its banks, inundated Mantua in such a manner, that in certain low-lying parts of the city the water rose to the height of nearly 4 braccia, insomuch that for a long time frogs lived in them almost all the year round. Giulio, therefore, after pondering in what way he might put this right, so went to work that for the time being the city was restored to its former condition, and to the end that the same might not happen another time, he contrived to have the streets on that side raised so much, by command of the Duke, that they came above the level of the water, and the buildings stood in safety. In that part of the city the houses were small, slightly built, and of no great importance, and he gave orders that they should be pulled down, in order to raise the streets and bring that quarter to a better state, and that new houses, larger and more beautiful, should be built there, to the advantage and improvement of the city. To this measure many opposed themselves, saying to the Duke that Giulio was doing too much havoc, but he would not hear any of them. Nay, he made Giulio superintendent of the streets at that very time, and decreed that no one should build in that city save under Giulio's direction. On which account, many complaining and some even threatening Giulio, this came to the ears of the Duke, who used such words in his favour as made it known that if they did anything to the despite or injury of Giulio, he would count it as done to himself, and would make an example of them. The Duke was so enamoured of the excellence of Giulio that he could not live without him, and Giulio, on his part, bore to that lord the greatest reverence that it is possible to imagine. Wherefore he never asked a favour for himself or for others without obtaining it, and when he died it was found that with all he had received from the Duke he had an income of more than 1,000 ducats. Giulio built a house for himself in Mantua, opposite to St. Barnaba, on the outer side of which he made a fantastic façade, all wrought with coloured stucco, and the interior he caused to be all painted and wrought likewise with stucco, and he found place in it for many antiquities brought from Rome and others received from the Duke, to whom he gave many of his own. He made so many designs both for Mantua and for places in its neighbourhood that it was a thing incredible, for, as has been told, no palaces or other buildings of importance could be erected, particularly in the city, save after his design. He rebuilt upon the old walls of the church of San Benedetto a rich and vast seat of black friars at Mantua near the Po, and the whole church was embellished with most beautiful paintings and altarpieces from designs by his hand. And since his works were very highly prized throughout Lombardy, it pleased Gian Matteo Ghiberti, Bishop of Verona, to have the tribune of the Duomo of that city all painted, as has been related in another place, by Il Moro the Veronese, after designs by Giulio. For the Duke of Ferrara also he executed many designs for tapestries, which were afterwards woven in silk and gold by Maestro Niccolo and Giovan Battista Rosso, both Flemings, and of these there are engravings to be seen, executed by Giovan Battista Mantovano, who engraved a vast number of things drawn by Giulio, and in particular, besides 3 drawings of battles engraved by others, a physician who is applying cupping glasses to the shoulders of a woman, and the flight of Our Lady into Egypt, with Joseph holding the ass by the halter, and some angels bending down a date palm in order that Christ may pluck the fruit. The same master engraved, also after the designs of Giulio, the wolf on the Tiber suckling Romulus and Remus, and 4 stories of Pluto, Jove, and Neptune, who are dividing the heavens, the earth, and the sea among them by lot, and likewise the goat Amalthea, which, held by Melissa, is giving suck to Jove, and a large plate of many men in a prison, tortured in various ways. There were also printed, after the inventions of Giulio, Scipio, and Hannibal holding a parley with their armies on the banks of the river, the Nativity of St. John the Baptist, which was engraved by Sebastiano da Reggio, and many other works engraved and printed in Italy. In Flanders and in France, likewise, have been printed innumerable sheets from designs by Giulio, of which, although they are very beautiful, there is no need to make mention, nor of all his drawings, seeing that he made them, so to speak, in loads. Let it be enough to say that he was so facile in every field of art, and particularly in drawing, that we have no record of anyone who has produced more than he did. Giulio, who was very versatile, was able to discourse on every subject, but above all on medals, upon which he spent large sums of money and much time in order to gain knowledge of them. And although he was employed almost always in great works, this does not mean that he would not set his hand at times to the most trifling of matters in order to oblige his patron and his friends, and no sooner had one opened his mouth to explain to him his conception than he had understood it and drawn it. Among the many rare things that he had in his house was the portrait from life of Albrecht Dürer, on a piece of fine Rheims cloth by the hand of Albrecht himself, who sent it, as has been related in another place, as a present to Raffaello da Urbino. This portrait was an exquisite thing, for it had been coloured in gouache with much diligence with water-colours, and Albrecht had executed it without using lead white, availing himself in its stead of the white of the cloth, with the delicate threads of which he had so well rendered the hairs of the beard, that it was a thing scarcely possible to imagine, much less to do, and when held up to the light it showed through on either side. This portrait, which was very dear to Giulio, he showed to me himself as a miracle, when I went during his lifetime to Mantua on some affairs of my own. At the death of Duke Federigo, by whom Giulio had been beloved beyond belief, he was so overcome with sorrow that he would have left Mantua, if the cardinal, the brother of the duke, on whom the government of the state had descended because the sons of Federigo were very young, had not detained him in that city, where he had a wife and children, houses, villas, and all the other possessions that are proper to a gentleman of means. And this the cardinal did, aided by those reasons, from a wish to avail himself of the advice and assistance of Giulio in renovating, or rather building almost entirely anew, the Duomo of that city, to which work Giulio set his hand and carried it well on in a very beautiful form. At this time, Giorgio Vasari, who was much the friend of Giulio, although they did not know one another save only by reputation and by letters, in going to Venice, took the road by Mantua in order to see Giulio and his works. And so, having arrived in that city, and going to find his friend, when they met, although they had never seen each other, they knew one another no less surely than if they had been together in person 1,000 times. At which Giulio was so filled with joy and contentment, that for 4 days he never left him, showing him all his works, and in particular all the ground plans of the ancient edifices in Rome, Naples, Pozzuolo, and Campania, and of all the other fine antiquities of which anything is known, drawn partly by him and partly by others. Then, opening a very large press, he showed to Giorgio the ground plans of all the buildings that had been erected after his designs and under his direction, not only in Mantua and in Rome, but throughout all Lombardy, which were so beautiful that I, for my part, do not believe that there are to be seen any architectural inventions more original, more lovely, or better composed. After this, the cardinal asking Giorgio what he thought of the works of Giulio, Giorgio answered in the presence of Giulio that they were such that he deserved to have a statue of himself placed at every corner of the city, and that since he had given the city a new life, the half of the state would not be a sufficient reward for the labours and abilities of Giulio. To which the cardinal answered that Giulio was more the master of that state than he was himself. And since Giulio was very loving, especially towards his friends, there was no mark of love and affection that Giorgio did not receive from him. The same Vasari, having left Mantua and gone to Venice, returned to Rome at the very time when Michelagnolo had just uncovered his last judgment in the chapel, and he sent to Giulio by Monsignor Nino Nini of Cortonia, the secretary of the aforesaid Cardinal of Mantua, 3 sheets containing the 7 mortal sins, copied from that last judgment of Michelagnolo, which were welcome in no ordinary manner to Giulio, both as being what they were, and because he had at that time to paint a chapel in the palace of the cardinal, and they served to inspire him to greater things than those that he had in mind. Putting forward all possible effort, therefore, to make a most beautiful cartoon, he drew in it with fine fancy the scene of Peter and Andrew leaving their nets at the call of Christ, in order to follow him, and to be thenceforward not fishers of fishes, but fishers of men. And this cartoon, which proved to be the most beautiful that Giulio had ever made, was afterwards carried into execution by the painter Fermo Ghisoni, a pupil of Giulio, and now an excellent master. Not long afterwards the superintendents of the building of San Petronio at Bologna, being desirous to make a beginning with the facade of that church, succeeded after great difficulty in inducing Giulio to go there, in company with a Milanese architect called Tofano Lombardino, a man in great repute at that time in Lombardy for the many buildings by his hand that were to be seen in that country. These masters, then, made many designs, those of Baldassare Peruzzi of Siena having been lost, and one that Giulio made, among others, was so beautiful and so well ordered that he rightly received very great praise for it from that people, and was rewarded with most liberal gifts on his return to Mantua. Meanwhile, Antonio da San Gallo having died at Rome about that time, the superintendence of the building of San Pietro had been thereby left in no little embarrassment, not knowing to whom to turn or on whom to lay the charge of carrying that great fabric to completion after the plan already begun. But they thought that no one could be more fitted for this than Giulio Romano, for they all knew how great were his worth and excellence. And so, surmising that he would accept such a charge more than willingly in order to repatriate himself in an honourable manner, and with a good salary, they caused some of his friends to approach him, but in vain, for the reason that, although he would have gone with great willingness, two things prevented him. The cardinal would in no way consent to his departure, and his wife, with her relatives and friends, used every possible means to dissuade him. Neither of these two reasons, perchance, would have prevailed with him if he had not happened to be in somewhat feeble health at that time, for, having considered how much honour and profit he might secure for himself and his children by accepting so handsome a proposal, he was already fully disposed to make every effort not to be hindered in the matter by the cardinal, when his malady began to grow worse. However, since it had been ordained on high that he should go no more to Rome, and that this should be the end and conclusion of his life, in a few days, what with his vexation and his malady, he died at Mantua, which city might well have allowed him, even as he had embellished her, so also to honour and adorn his native city of Rome. Giulio died at the age of 54, leaving only one male child, to whom he had given the name of Raffaello out of regard for the memory of his master. This young Raffaello had scarcely learned the first rudiments of art, showing signs of being destined to become an able master, when he also died, not many years after, together with his mother, Giulio's wife. Wherefore there remained no descendant of Giulio, save a daughter called Virginia, who still lives in Mantua, married to Ercole Malatesta. Giulio, whose death was an infinite grief to all who knew him, was given burial in St. Barnaba, where it was proposed that some honourable memorial should be erected to him. But his wife and children, postponing the matter from one day to another, themselves died for the most part without doing anything. It is indeed a sad thing that there has been no one who has treasured in any way the memory of a man who did so much to adorn that city, save only those who availed themselves of his services, who have often remembered him in their necessities. But his own talent, which did him so much honour in his lifetime, has secured for him after death, in the form of his own works, an everlasting monument which time, with all its years, can never destroy. Giulio was neither tall nor short of stature, and rather stout than slight in build. He had black hair, beautiful features, and eyes dark and merry, and he was very loving, regular in all his actions, and frugal in eating, but fond of dressing and living in honourable fashion. He had disciples in plenty, but the best were Giovanni da Lione, Raffaello dal Colle of Borgo, Benedetto Pagni of Pescia, Figurino da Faenza, Rinaldo Mantovano, Giovan Battista Mantovano, and Fermo Ghizzoni, who still lives in Mantua and does him honour, being an excellent painter. And the same may be said for Benedetto, who has executed many works in his native city of Pescia, and an altarpiece for the Duomo of Pisa, which is in the Office of Works, and also a picture of Our Lady in which, with a poetical invention full of grace and beauty, he painted a figure of Florence presenting to her the dignities of the House of Medici, which picture is now in the possession of Signor Mondragone, a Spaniard much in favour with that most illustrious lord, the Prince of Florence. Giulio died on the day of All Saints in the year 1546, and over his tomb was placed the following epitaph: Romanus moriens secum tres Julius artes abstulit, haud mirum, quatuor unus erat.